Hi, fashion industry sketching. So this week for homework, you are going to produce a final portfolio ready version of your fifth garment illustration. So you may or may not be producing your fifth garment in real life at this point, but maybe you've ordered something from Printful, or maybe you had an idea that you are unable to accomplish right now. Either way, this is going to be kind of like a culmination of that project, and maybe we finish it with a real garment, and maybe we don't. You guys can let me know where you are in to do with that in the discussion this week. I would love some feedback on, like, did you order from Printful? Did you order fabric? I would love pictures if you did get fabric or Printful or whatever. I would love to see all of that and your final illustration. So um, we are just going to review. Mostly I want you guys to reference the last 2 weeks' videos. You can choose either to draw this illustration in Illustrator, or you can draw it by hand and upload it to Photoshop and edit it and add the pattern in Photoshop. Or if you have access to some kind of drawing tablet, you're also welcome to draw it in Photoshop if you so choose. So I'm leaving the medium up to you, as long as there is some kind of digital reinterpretation of the illustration, okay? So I'm just going to go over how to put your patterns on illustrations, depending on whether you are drawing and designing your pattern in Illustrator, or whether you're drawing or designing your pattern in Photoshop, and how to kind of move them back and forth between Photoshop and Illustrator at your convenience. So I'm back here in our Illustrator drawing, and I want to bring my Bomb Pops pattern into this illustration, but right now if I look at my swatches, the Bomb Pops pattern is not in there. It is in my swatches when I'm on my Bomb Pops page. So my favorite way to bring swatches back and forth between Illustrator files is to actually just draw a rectangle that is filled with the pattern and copy it and paste it into this page. And if we look at this, when I hit paste, the swatch should appear probably right here. So edit, paste. And there is the swatch, and now we can actually delete this this rectangle. All of the information is saved in this swatch. So when I go to now draw on top of her, let me grab the pencil tool. I can draw my shape, and you would maybe draw it better. Okay. I drew a shape, and then we'll fill it with a color first. I would fill it straight up with the pattern, but I'm going to make sure that this shape I'm building is on the top of these layers, and we'll lock all the other layers for right now. So this is on its own layer, and I'm just instead of putting, because this has a transparent background, instead of putting it on her directly, we are going to we're going to give it a fill of a color, and then we are going to edit copy, and we're going to choose edit paste in front, and paste in front is going to put it exactly on top of this original shape, and then we can fill it. Right click, transform, scale, and we're going to make the pattern smaller and not the object. If we type in 50% now and click somewhere else so that it applies, and we check preview, it's going to make the whole garment smaller. So we're going to uncheck transform objects, and now transform patterns is the only thing that's checked, and when we adjust the scale here, it only adjusts the pattern and not the shape. So now we could draw any of our details that we needed to on it. Maybe there is maybe there's a center front seam. Let's add some shadows. So to add shadows, I am going to probably copy and paste the shape for a second, and we are going to grab the knife tool and draw where we think there should be shadows. So probably down this whole side, probably down, actually under the crotch. And now these need to be ungrouped. Oh no, they are separate shapes already. They don't need to be ungrouped. So I can delete that guy, and then we know that these shapes line up perfectly with these shapes, so I can make them gray or dark blue, and we are going to make them a little bit transparent. So we need, what do we need? The transparency panel, which I am going to have to go to Window, Transparency, which it wasn't out, and that's why I can, if I want to, I can pop it in here. Transparency. And let's just try lowering the opacity at first, and we are going to give these no stroke. They're just going to be shadow. No stroke over here, right? Fill, stroke. And there we go. Let's try adjusting. We can also adjust the transparency to like be on multiply or overlay, hard light. And we can adjust the color to also change how it interprets things. My computer's acting funny, running slow. Gotta make sure fill is in the front and have these selected. There we go, that's looking better. So this is how we could add pattern to our illustration that we drew in Illustrator. Ideally, you guys would be drawing a whole brand new illustration, but this was for demonstration purposes. So how would we do this if we designed our pattern in Photoshop, but we still wanted to draw our illustration in Illustrator? So I have a pattern open in Photoshop, and this is where I got things arranged and made things perfect. And this is my individual square of the pattern, right? So if we would go to edit, define pattern, these would be seamless patterns in here. And what I'm hoping is that you still have this original square where you went to edit, define pattern to kind of make the repeat. And this square, or this tile, I tend to call it a single tile or a single repeat. And this is the easiest way to bring things into Photoshop. So I've saved this image as a JPEG, and in here I'm going to drop that JPEG in there. Sorry, hold on. Here it is. And this pattern is really big, so it's nice so that we don't have to rescale the pattern. It's nice to rescale the JPEG out here to be the correct size. Right, so that might even be a tiny bit too small. And then we are going to go to, with it selected, and we have to hit embed first so that it doesn't have any crosses through it. We are going to go to Objects, Pattern, Make, and this is a straight repeat, so it looks like things are lining up okay. Something is like a little bit wrong with it, unfortunately. From top to bottom, it's missing a few pixels, and that's just my fault in designing it. I'm not sure how that I will be able to fix that right now. So I'm just going to live with it and hit done. If mine's a straight repeat or a grid, but if you had designed a brick or something like that, you could adjust that here too. So I'm going to hit done, and then we could easily just fill this with the new pattern that's been added to the swatches, and we would have to adjust some things here, like the color of this. So that is how I would bring that in, especially if I had access to my original tile where I had organized that stuff. If you don't have access to your original tile, you might, if you have Adobe Photoshop CC, your pattern may be saved in this new patterns panel. This has never existed before, window patterns, if you don't have access to it. And all the patterns that I've made for us on my computer over a few weeks are stored in here. So I can just click and drag this into here, like we made this one together. And what I would need to do is isolate the original size, the original tile of the pattern. That would probably be the easiest way to bring it back in to Illustrator. Right, if we so I am going to try using the crop tool to make this image much bigger, or this file much bigger, and then I'm going to use the crop tool again, and we need to change this. Yeah, so width, height, resolution allows the crop to be any kind of proportion. And with this particular pattern, it is easy to isolate the original tile because none of these flowers touch the edge. This was a really gridded pattern, but if you had a more complex pattern in here, you would probably want to zoom in and make sure that things were pixel perfect on the edges, right? So I can hit enter, and then I would save this as a JPEG and bring that into Illustrator. It's probably the easiest way to do it. So now let's talk about what if so review last week's lecture for more details, but basically in order to get the repeating pattern on this, which was just a plain green jacket, you can make a new fill layer. So layer, new fill layer pattern, which is the same thing that happens when you choose patterns from your pattern panel that I just introduced. And we can choose the pattern we made and double click on the fill layer and scale down until we think it looks like a good size. And then rasterize the layer, and we rasterize it so that we can easily copy and paste more manageable sections. We don't want any feather on this. And these more manageable sections are what we then make into the pattern, or into the shapes of the garments, and we normally choose multiply to apply them to the pattern, right? I think I have some filter or some selections saved. And we can choose to put a clipping mask on that, right? Adding a clipping mask is nice because it allows for flexibility. If we unlink the clipping mask from the original JPEG, then we can move the JPEG around and kind of get the pattern in the right spot on here. Or if we needed to, we could go to Edit, Transform, and warp the pattern so that things get real funky there, or like they look like they're wrapping around the body or whatnot. So that's how to do it if you already have your pattern in Photoshop. But if you designed your pattern in Illustrator and you want to put it on a pattern in Photoshop, there's a few ways to do it, but we'll talk about my favorites. So this is the file that has my Bomb Pops pattern in the image. So I am going to I'm actually going to make a rectangle that is 8.5, or actually 11 by 17, because that's what I was working on in the other space. And we're going to try just hitting Control X and pasting it into Photoshop. Hold on. And we are going to choose to paste it as pixels. And there is our pattern. It's much, much too big, so we're going to scale it down in Photoshop. Or sorry, in Illustrator. So I'm going to choose this shape, right click, transform, scale, and we don't want to transform the size of the rectangle, we just want to transform the size of the pattern in there. So let's hit OK, and I'll try doing copy and paste again. And again, we want it to be pixels. It's just being slow, and so that's a much better size. And from here, after we embed it, or after we hit enter, we could be copying and pasting these pixels just like we have for the other shape. And actually, since this is transparent, it's going to be even easier to kind of not have to blend the pattern too much. Like the colors won't change too much necessarily where they don't have to. So let's load the whole jacket, and we will make this a closed shape. So that looks pretty interesting, honestly. And then we could always unlink and choose to warp things to make things look, you know, less even all the way across. We could also choose to have this have a transparency setting to it so that it gets some of the shadow from behind it. Overlay looks nice, or vivid light is starting to look realistic. So the illustrations that I like to work from in Photoshop are generally they have shadow built into them already, and I've done the shadow by hand, which I think is sometimes easier, and then in here is where I'm adding that kind of intricate detail that drawing clothes with patterns on them allows you to do. So I think I've addressed all of the different combinations of like where you could have made your pattern and where you could be doing your illustration. I wouldn't want you to draw your pattern by hand on the illustration. The intention of this assignment is that you're kind of combining it with your illustration, whether you've made it in Illustrator or in Photoshop. Let me know if you have any questions about the illustration aspect of this homework. You are also supposed to make a fashion flat of your illustration, and I think I'm going to post links to other videos where I've talked a lot about fashion flats, or maybe where other people have talked about fashion flats to kind of help you get through that. The fashion flat is not as important as the fashion illustration in this project, so please focus on the illustration, especially if you are new to drawing flats. Don't worry about it as much as the illustration. So everything that's due for homework is your illustration of your fifth garment with your pattern on it, and then a flat of your fifth garment with your pattern on it. And these are supposed to look really nice in your portfolio together next to each other. So let me know if you have any questions about the overall homeworks or anything like that.